Evan Carter, a war veteran lost in the silence of Buffalo's winter, rescues a wounded German shepherd pup beside its fallen mother. He names him Kaiser, and from that night, their lives are forever changed. Through pain, rejection, and a storm that nearly takes everything, the bond between man and dog becomes something divine. Was it Evan who saved Kaiser? Or did God send Kaiser to save him? The sky above Buffalo was a sheet of dull steel, heavy and unmoving, the kind of winter sky that made even breath feel like glass. Snow fell without sound, layering the wooden bridge in white, swallowing every footprint that dared to exist. Evan Carter moved along the riverbank with the stiff caution of a man who had seen too much. He was 39, tall but slightly hunched, his shoulders bearing invisible armor. A faint limp marked his left leg, a relic from a roadside explosion in Kandahar 8 years ago. His beard, once trimmed by military precision, had grown uneven, peppered with gray. His eyes, gray like spent gunmetal, carried the faraway look of someone still halfway between two wars, the one he fought overseas, and the one that waited each night inside his own head. Evan was a man hollowed by silence. He had returned from Afghanistan to an empty house, an empty bed, and an endless list of medications that dulled the world more than they helped it. Nights were the worst. Sleep never lasted long enough. Dreams came like ambushes, and dawn only reminded him how alive he still was. He had taken to walking the frozen outskirts of Buffalo at odd hours, the cold at least giving him something honest to feel. That evening, the wind rose from the river like a living thing. It howled through the cracked railings of the old bridge as Evan crossed, boots creaking on ice. He paused when he heard it, a thin, broken whimper beneath the wooden beams. At first he thought it was the wind's trickery, but then it came again, soft, pleading, the unmistakable cry of pain. His instincts, those that never truly left soldiers, pulled him toward the sound. He crouched low, gripping the frosted railing, and peered down. What he saw made his breath lock in his chest. Beneath the bridge, half buried in snow, lay the body of a German shepherd, her fur once golden but now stiffened by ice and blood. Her body curved protectively around a small black bundle pressed against her ribs. The mother's eyes were open, clouded and still, but the tiny creature beside her moved weakly, alive, barely. Evan climbed down, boots sliding, hands scraping wood and frost. When he knelt beside them, the smell of iron and decay stung his nose. The ground around was a battlefield, paw prints tangled in circles, dark stains in the snow, bits of torn paper that had once been food wrappers. From the claw marks and scattered fur, he understood what had happened. The mother had fought, maybe stray dogs, maybe coyotes, over a scrap of food, and paid with her life to protect her young. The pup was no more than 6 weeks old, small enough to fit in both of Evan's hands. Its fur was black as soot, matted with dried blood along the flank. One ear flopped sideways, the other twitching as if still listening for the heartbeat that had gone silent beside it. Its chest rose and fell shallowly, trembling under the weight of cold. When Evan touched it, the pup gave a weak sound, half cry, half sigh. "Hey, hey," he whispered, voice rough from disuse. "Easy now." He hesitated. For years, Evan had avoided attachments, the kind that could die, the kind that could remind him of loss. He had lost too many already. But something in the pup's tiny movement, its blind faith in reaching for warmth, cut through the walls he'd built. Without another thought, he unbuttoned his heavy coat, pressed the pup against his chest, and wrapped the fabric around them both. Its heartbeat fluttered like a fragile drum under his ribs. "Come on, little fighter," he murmured, standing slowly. "You're not dying today." The walk home felt longer than it was. Snow thickened, erasing his tracks as he made them. The bridge disappeared behind him, like a memory being buried. In his small house on the edge of town, a one-story relic of the 1950s filled with the ghosts of half-unpacked boxes, Evan laid the pup on an old towel near the stove. He turned the knob to its highest flame and sat down cross-legged beside it, watching steam curl from the wet fur. The pup shivered violently, then went still. For a moment, panic surged through him. "No, no, no!" He rubbed the pup's sides briskly, the way he had done for wounded comrades in the desert. "Breathe, soldier. That's an order." A faint movement answered him. The pup coughed, a thin sound that broke the silence like glass. Relief flooded through him, sharp and bright. He mixed some chicken broth and water in a cup, found an eyedropper in his first aid kit, and began feeding it drop by drop. The tiny mouth opened, instinct taking over. Hours passed. Outside, the wind softened into a distant hum. Inside, Evan sat beside the small creature, the stove's glow flickering across his worn face. Each time the pup stirred, something inside him steadied. For the first time in years, his mind wasn't replaying explosions or names of the dead. His focus narrowed to one fragile life he could actually save. When the clock on the wall read 2 a.m., the pup's breathing had grown strong and even. It slept curled on a folded blanket, its paws twitching in dream. Evan leaned back in his chair, exhausted. He studied the animal under the flicker of the stove, too small to survive, yet somehow still alive. That stubbornness spoke to him. He thought of soldiers he'd lost, men who fought till the end for reasons no one back home could ever understand. "You've got spirit," he murmured, smiling faintly. "You're like your mother, huh? A little warrior?" His gaze drifted to the window, where snow pressed softly against the glass, dimming the outside world. For the first time in months, the silence didn't feel like an enemy. It felt earned. He stood, looked down at the pup one last time and whispered, "Kaiser. That's your name." The word hung in the air, firm, regal, somehow fitting. The pup's ear twitched at the sound, as if accepting it. Evan turned off the stove, leaving the soft afterglow of embers to warm the room. He settled on the couch, head resting back, eyes half closed. His thoughts drifted not toward the war or the pain, but toward the fragile heartbeat sleeping beside the fire. Outside, the storm continued to bury the world in white. Beneath that blanket of snow, near the frozen bridge, lay the body of a mother who had given her life for her child. Inside, another kind of soldier had taken up that cause, quietly, unknowingly, beginning his own rescue. And for the first time in many years, Evan Carter fell asleep without dreaming. Morning in Buffalo rose colorless, the sky a pale wound stretched above the frozen roofs. The storm had passed, leaving behind a quiet so heavy it seemed afraid to break. Inside the small house on Grant Street, the air was still thick with the smell of smoke and broth. Evan Carter stood by the window, his reflection faint in the glass, coffee trembling in his hand. 3 days had passed since he found the puppy beneath the bridge, 3 days since he had carried it through the storm like a fragile secret. The pup, now stronger, noisier, and hungrier, had begun to explore every inch of the living room. Evan had fed him ground chicken, warmed milk, bits of eggs from the fridge. The small black creature followed him everywhere now, tail wagging with the persistence of something that refused to be unloved. Evan looked down. Kaiser, as he had named him, was chewing determinedly on the leather strap of his old duffel bag, tail sweeping dust from the floor. The dog's fur had darkened, gleaming faintly with health, though scars still marked his shoulder where the fight for food had torn his flesh. His eyes, amber and fierce, were no longer the eyes of a helpless creature. They were alive, studying everything with disarming curiosity. Evan sighed and reached for the strap. "Hey," he muttered, "that's not a toy, soldier." Kaiser froze, head tilted, then barked once as if in argument. Evan couldn't help the small, crooked smile that found its way to his face. But peace in Evan's world was a fragile visitor. The quiet afternoons that Kaiser filled with small mischief were only a pause between storms. Nights still brought the same ghosts, screams from across deserts, the metallic taste of sand and blood, the echo of orders shouted into chaos. Sometimes he woke up sweating, fists clenched, breath short. More than once, Kaiser would crawl up onto the bed, pressing against his ribs until the shaking stopped. It was strange, Evan thought, how a creature so small could sense the fractures inside him that no doctor ever could. 2 blocks away lived Nora Patel, a local veterinarian in her early 40s. She was a small woman with sharp eyes, dark hair pulled into a knot, and a voice that carried calm authority. She had grown up in Buffalo, daughter of Indian immigrants who had opened a small grocery on the East Side. Her kindness had a professional edge, gentle but direct. When Evan finally took Kaiser to her clinic for a checkup, she looked at him with the practiced empathy of someone who had seen too many wounded things, both animal and human. "You've done a good thing," she said, running her hands along Kaiser's ribs. "But he's got fight scars, see? Deep ones. You'll need antibiotics and patience." She gave him a bottle of pills and a smile that reached her tired eyes. "Most people wouldn't have stopped in that storm. Guess you're not most people." Evan had grunted in reply, uncomfortable with praise. He wasn't used to kindness anymore. It felt like a language he'd forgotten how to speak. When he left the clinic, he noticed Kaiser sitting proudly beside him in the truck, nose pressed to the window as if memorizing the world. For a moment, something soft flickered inside Evan. Hope, maybe, or its fragile cousin. But hope was a dangerous thing for a man like him. The next night, the nightmares returned harder. He woke up shouting names that didn't belong to this house. Ramos, Dyer, Collins. Men who never came back from that convoy ambush. Sweat drenched his shirt, his pulse hammered. Kaiser barked once, startled, then leapt onto the bed, pawing at his chest. Evan shoved him away. "No!" The word tore from him sharper than intended. Kaiser whimpered but stayed. Evan's breathing turned ragged, fury rising at himself, at the ghosts, at the damned persistence of the world that refused to let him rest. He stood, kicked the chair, and roared, "Get out! Go! Just go!" The sound cracked through the house like a gunshot. Kaiser flinched, ears flattened, then backed toward the door. Evan's face was pale, lips trembling, not with anger, but with something worse: shame. The dog waited a heartbeat longer, eyes wide and uncertain, before Evan's hand slammed the door shut. Outside, the wind picked up again. Snow began to fall, soft at first, then heavier, swirling like ash. Kaiser sat down on the porch, confusion giving way to understanding. He circled once, lay down, and rested his muzzle on his paws. His fur gathered white, his small body shivering, but he didn't leave. Inside, Evan paced the room like a caged thing. The silence pressed on him until it hurt. He stared at the closed door, at the faint outline of paw prints visible under the porch light, and told himself he'd done the right thing. He's just a dog. You don't need another responsibility, not another life to lose. But the words didn't stick. They fell apart, weak and hollow. The longer he stood there, the more he hated himself. By midnight, guilt had settled deep in his bones. He poured whiskey into a chipped mug, stared at it, then poured it down the sink. Through the window, he saw a lump of snow that moved faintly. His breath caught. He opened the door. The cold hit like a wall. Kaiser was there, half buried, his fur caked with frost, one paw bleeding from ice cuts. His tail thumped once when he saw Evan, too weak to lift fully. The sight broke something open in him. He dropped to his knees, scooping the dog up into his arms. Jesus, Kaiser. His voice cracked. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The dog didn't resist. He pressed his head against Evan's chest, a small sound of relief escaping him. Evan carried him inside, setting him near the heater. He rubbed the stiff fur, thawing it with careful hands, whispering nonsense, words that had not left his lips since before the war. When Kaiser finally licked his wrist, a laugh escaped Evan. Half sob, half disbelief. He sat there for hours, the dog's steady breathing syncing with his own. By dawn, light filtered through the frosted window, painting them both in pale gold. The storm had ended again, leaving only silence. Evan looked down at the animal that refused to abandon him and understood what he hadn't for years. Forgiveness didn't always come from heaven. Sometimes it came with pause, with patience, and with eyes that asked for nothing in return. He whispered, "You stayed." Kaiser's tail moved once. In that small motion, Evan found the first real prayer he'd said in a decade. The week after the storm brought a deceptive calm to Buffalo. The snowbanks along Grant Street sparkled under a shy sun, hiding the city's ugliness beneath a temporary beauty. For Evan Carter, it had become routine to walk Kaiser along the edge of the river trail at dusk, when the world quieted enough that the air felt bearable. Kaiser, now nearly 6 months old, had grown tall and lean, his black coat thick and gleaming like coal brushed with silver dust. His gait had the confidence of a soldier, head high, steps measured, eyes constantly scanning. Evan watched him sometimes with a quiet pride he didn't dare name. The dog had become more than company. He was structure, purpose, and the only pulse in Evan's empty house that wasn't his own. But the neighborhood had its own rhythm, one that didn't always forgive the unfamiliar. Rumors had spread faster than winter wind. The war vet with the dangerous shepherd, the soldier who talks to ghosts and trains a killer dog. It started with whispers at Tilly's Diner, where the morning regulars gathered with steaming mugs and easy judgment. It reached Frank Delaney, the owner of the local gas station, a man with a ruddy face, thinning hair, and a lifelong distrust of big dogs since a childhood attack left a faint scar across his forearm. By the end of the week, it had reached the police precinct through the anxious murmurs of frightened residents. Evan didn't know any of this as he trudged through the fresh snow that Friday night. His world was simple: walk, breathe, survive. The PTSD medication Dr. Klein at the VA had prescribed sat untouched in the cabinet. The only therapy that worked came padded with fur and silent understanding. Kaiser trotted beside him, breath puffing in little clouds, leash loose. They reached the corner of Elmwood Avenue, where the light from the bar spilled out in fractured amber across the snow. The Maple Tavern was a dim, narrow place, half refuge, half regret, frequented by men who drank away their winters. That night, One of them stumbled out. Ray Haskell, 45, barrel-chested, red-nosed, his eyes glazed with cheap whiskey and bitterness. He'd been a factory worker before the plant shut down, and now his anger had nowhere to go. When he saw the black shepherd and the quiet man walking behind it, something inside him twisted. "Hey," he slurred, pointing. "Keep that beast away from us!" His voice cracked through the air like a whip. Evan froze, instinctively moving Kaiser behind him. "He's not hurting anyone," he said evenly. But Ray was too far gone to hear reason. He stooped, grabbed a chunk of frozen slush, and hurled it. The ice hit Evan squarely on the shoulder, a dull thud followed by the sting of impact. Kaiser's reaction was immediate, pure instinct, honed by some ancestral memory of pack and protection. He lunged forward, muscles rippling under his coat, placing himself between Evan and the man. His snarl cut through the night, low and sharp, not a sound of malice but of warning. Ray staggered back, falling into the snow, his drink spilling like dark blood. The dog never touched him. He simply stood there, tail stiff, fangs bared, every inch of him saying, "One more step, and I'll end this." The bar's door burst open, 2 men, then another, voices overlapping. "He's attacking! Call the cops! That thing's gone mad!" By the time the flashing red and blue lights painted the snow, the street had become a stage for misunderstanding. Officer Rita Morales, 32, was the first to arrive. She was tall, her brown hair tucked neatly under her cap, her posture straight from years of discipline. Her mixed Puerto Rican and Irish heritage gave her striking features: olive skin, sharp cheekbones, eyes that missed nothing. Rita was known in the precinct as fair but unbending, shaped by a father who'd been a cop in the Bronx before being shot during a domestic call. She had learned early that fear often disguised itself as anger. "What happened here?" she asked, scanning the scene. Ray's friends shouted over each other. "The dog attacked! He almost tore him apart!" Evan, voice steady but tight, answered, "He didn't touch him. The man threw ice at me. The dog reacted. He's trained to protect." Kaiser sat at Evan's heel now, obedient, calm, though his chest still heaved from adrenaline. Rita watched him, how the dog stayed close but not aggressive, how his eyes followed her every movement with measured intelligence. Still, regulations were clear. "Sir," she said, "we need to take the animal in for observation. Standard procedure." Evan's jaw tightened. "He didn't do anything wrong." "That's not my call," Rita replied, softer than her words allowed. 2 animal control officers arrived with a steel crate and thick gloves, treating Kaiser as though he were a wild predator. When they slipped the loop over his neck, the dog resisted at first, muscles coiled, eyes flicking desperately toward Evan. "Easy, Kaiser," Evan murmured, kneeling. "It's okay. I'll fix this." The dog whimpered, a sound that pierced through even the police radio chatter. Then the door closed, and he was gone. The next morning, the holding facility was sterile and echoing, metal bars lined in rows. Kaiser lay curled in the corner of his cage, his breath fogging the cold air. Evan stood outside, separated by the mesh, fingers gripping the bars. The dog lifted his head and let out a low, uncertain cry. Evan whispered, "You did what you were supposed to do." But guilt gnawed at him like frostbite. He had failed him again. Dr. Nora Patel arrived that afternoon, her wool coat dusted with snow, eyes sharp with purpose. "This is ridiculous," she said to Rita Morales, who stood nearby reviewing reports. "I've treated that dog since he was 6 weeks old. He's gentle, obedient, responsive to commands. There's no history of aggression. Rita sighed. You know how it works, Doc. Public complaint, automatic hold, 10 days minimum. 10 days in that cage will break him, Nora countered. He's bonded to that man. It's therapy for both of them. Rita met her gaze, conflicted. Look, between you and me, I don't think the dog's dangerous, but the paperwork's already in motion. I'll see what I can do. For the next week, Evan made daily visits, his presence steady but his eyes dimming. The small room smelled of disinfectant and despair. He would sit on the cold floor beside the cage, murmuring old military stories, soft, fragmented pieces of his life, while Kaiser listened, tail thumping faintly. It wasn't the dog who was in danger of breaking. It was the man. One evening, Rita stopped by after hours, a coffee in hand. You've got people talking, she said. Half the town thinks your dog's a menace. The other half thinks you're a hero for saving him. Evan looked up, voice low. He saved me. Something in his tone made her pause. Then maybe we should start proving it. She left with a promise to review the reports. Nora, meanwhile, began calling colleagues and animal welfare advocates, gathering statements to argue for Kaiser's release. Bureaucracy moved slowly, but the bond between a soldier and his dog didn't. Each day without him felt like losing oxygen. When the call finally came, we'll schedule a hearing next week. Evan felt neither relief nor victory, only a quiet resolve. He wrote a letter that night, not to the authorities, but to the creature who had somehow become the center of his fragile world. You fought for me once, he wrote. Now I'll fight for you. Outside, buffalo snow began to fall again, soft, relentless, pure. In the distance, the river whispered beneath its frozen skin, carrying with it a promise that this story was far from over. March came to Buffalo not with spring, but with a cruel kind of thaw, the kind that turned ice into chaos. The air was thick with rain that never seemed to end, and the snowmelt from the surrounding hills fed the Niagara tributaries until the river swelled beyond its banks. Evan Carter stood at his porch that morning, mug of coffee untouched, listening to the distant growl of water. The radio had been warning of flash floods for 2 days, but Buffalo was a city that knew hardship. Most people simply tightened their coats and hoped it would pass. Evan, however, had learned long ago that nature doesn't negotiate. He could smell the danger in the air the same way he used to smell the gunpowder before an ambush. Inside, Kaiser paced restlessly by the door, tail stiff, ears twitching to every creak of the house. The German Shepherd had grown into a full-bodied adult now, just over 2 years old, his frame powerful and balanced, his fur a deep black sheen with streaks of amber under the neck. His amber eyes followed every movement of his owner with soldier-like attentiveness. Since his release from the shelter, he had reclaimed his place by Evan's side with quiet grace, though the weeks apart had left a subtle mark. Kaiser now flinched slightly at the sound of metal doors closing. Rain lashed against the window, and the distant wail of sirens cut through the wind. Dr. Nora Patel had called earlier that day, warning Evan that the riverbanks were becoming unstable. Her voice had carried a rare edge of fear. They're evacuating the north side, she had said. If the levee gives, the old footbridge will be the first to go. Evan remembered that bridge, rotting planks and rusted bolts. He had found Kaiser's mother and the dying pup beneath it more than a year ago. The thought chilled him deeper than the storm. By late afternoon, the rain had become a relentless wall of water. Power lines hissed, transformers popped blue sparks in the distance. Evan was preparing to move his truck to higher ground when it happened. The faint, almost lost sound of a human cry. It came again, raw and desperate, carried by the river wind. Kaiser's head snapped toward the sound immediately. Without hesitation, Evan grabbed his coat and flashlight, slinging a coil of rope across his shoulder. "Come on, boy," he said. "Let's go." They moved fast through ankle-deep water that surged along the cracked sidewalks. When they reached the riverbank, Evan could barely see through the curtain of rain. The bridge loomed ahead, sagging under the current, half submerged. And there, trapped against one of its supporting rails, was a small wooden bench tangled in debris. On it sat an elderly woman, her white hair plastered to her skull, her frail hands clutching the iron rail as the water climbed higher. "Help! Please!" she screamed, her voice breaking. Evan's flashlight caught her face. Margaret Hill, a widow in her late 70s who lived 2 streets over. She was known in the neighborhood for her morning walks with a cane and her habit of feeding the stray cats behind the grocery store. Her cheeks, now streaked with rain and mud, trembled with exhaustion. "Hang on, ma'am," Evan shouted over the roar. "We're coming!" The water was near waist-deep and moving fast. He tied one end of the rope to a nearby tree and wrapped the other around his torso. The current pulled at him the moment he stepped in. Kaiser leapt in beside him without command, cutting through the water like a dark blade. They fought their way forward, each step a battle. A floating branch struck Evan's shoulder, spinning him sideways. For one heart-stopping moment, he lost footing, and then felt the pull of teeth on his sleeve. Kaiser had him, dragging backward with all his strength, until Evan found ground again. "Good boy," he gasped, coughing water from his mouth. The dog barked once, a low, steady sound, then surged ahead toward the stranded woman. Margaret's legs were nearly submerged now. "I can't feel my feet," she cried. Evan climbed onto the last stable beam, kneeling beside her. "We'll get you out, I promise." His fingers worked quickly, looping the rope around her waist. "Kaiser!" he called. The shepherd swam closer, clamping his jaws gently around the other end of the rope. His teeth sank into the wet hemp, firm but controlled. Evan met his eyes. "Easy, boy. Hold steady." A sudden surge hit, the river rising with violent force. The bench shifted, the current pulling at all of them. Evan lost balance and slipped into the freezing torrent. His head went under. The world dissolved into cold and roar and darkness. Then something powerful hit his arm, a tug, insistent and alive. Kaiser. The dog had abandoned the rope to pull him up, teeth gripping his jacket, muscles straining against the current. Evan surfaced, gasping, eyes burning. Above them, Margaret clung to the rope that was still tied to the tree. "Don't let go!" Evan shouted. Together, he and Kaiser fought their way back, step by step, until he reached her. Kaiser grabbed the rope again, locking his body low against the current, tail whipping like a rudder. Inch by inch, they moved backward, until at last Margaret's feet hit the solid ground. Evan collapsed beside her, chest heaving. Kaiser staggered to the shore, water streaming from his coat, eyes bright even in exhaustion. The woman turned, her face pale and trembling. She touched the dog's head with a shaky hand. "That dog, he saved my life." When the rescue trucks arrived minutes later, the scene looked like something torn from a news headline. An old woman wrapped in blankets, a battered veteran crouched beside a soaked German shepherd, both looking half-drowned and wholly alive. Rita Morales was among the first responders. She took one look at Evan and shook her head. Half relief, half disbelief. "You again," she said, her voice breaking into an incredulous laugh. The next day, the story spread across Buffalo faster than the flood itself. Hero dog saves elderly woman in river rescue, the headlines read. For the first time, Kaiser's name was printed not with suspicion, but with gratitude. The same people who had once crossed the street to avoid Evan now left flowers at his gate. At the shelter hearing that week, the city council dropped all prior complaints. Rita presented the report herself, quoting Margaret Hill's testimony word for word. "That dog saved me before anyone else could reach me." The verdict was unanimous. Kaiser was cleared and formally recognized for service and bravery. Nora Patel submitted paperwork to register him as an official PTSD service animal. That evening, Evan sat on the porch, the last rain dripping from the eaves, Kaiser resting his head on his lap. The sky was clearing, the river calm again, carrying away the debris of what had been. Evan traced a scar along the dog's ear where a stone had grazed him. "I didn't save you, Kaiser," he said quietly. "You saved me." The dog lifted his head, eyes catching the dim light of the porch lamp, eyes that had seen death and yet chose life. Somewhere beyond the river, the wind whispered through the bare trees, soft and forgiving. And for the first time in a long while, Evan believed the world could still be kind. Spring came late to Buffalo, reluctant and shy, as if afraid to melt what the winter had carved into memory. The snow retreated in uneven patches, revealing muddy grass and the stubborn beginnings of green. Evan Carter stood outside his porch one morning, hands buried deep in the pockets of his worn jacket, watching the light shift through the thaw. He was leaner now, his face still marked by years of exhaustion, but there was something different in his eyes, a steadiness that had been missing for a long time. The quiet that once suffocated him had softened. It no longer sounded like loneliness. It sounded like peace. Beside him sat Kaiser, his coat gleaming under the pale sun, chest broad and proud. The shepherd was nearly 3 years old now, a full-grown embodiment of strength tempered by grace. He had become known around the city not as the dangerous dog, but as the hero of the river, a title that embarrassed Evan far more than it pleased him. Kaiser didn't seem to care for fame either. He only cared for the next command, the next walk, the next heartbeat that tied him to his human. The city council had made it official. Kaiser was certified as a PTSD service dog, following a ceremony at City Hall that Evan hadn't wanted to attend. But Dr. Nora Patel had insisted. "You owe it to him," she'd said, straightening his tie with a smile that disarmed his reluctance. "He deserves to be recognized." Nora looked healthier these days herself, her eyes less tired, her laugh more frequent. Her clinic had become something of a local refuge, known now as the place that saved the hero dog. Yet beneath her composed exterior, she carried the same gentle sadness that all caretakers do, the kind born from seeing too much suffering and too little kindness. The day of the ceremony, the crowd had been modest. Just a few city officials, reporters, and familiar faces from the neighborhood. Officer Rita Morales stood at the edge of the steps, her dark hair tied neatly, her expression caught somewhere between duty and quiet pride. When she'd handed Evan the certificate, she'd whispered, "Looks like you both made it home." Evan had nodded, unsure if his voice could manage an answer. Kaiser, sitting perfectly still, had wagged his tail once. Enough to make the crowd laugh. Now, weeks later, the world had settled back into its rhythm. Evan spent most mornings volunteering at the Buffalo Veterans Center, a modest brick building that smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. Inside, Men and women who had worn the same uniform gathered in folding chairs, each carrying their invisible battles. Some were loud, trying to outtalk their memories. Others were silent, staring through time. Evan knew both types. He had been both. Kaiser had become a fixture there. He would lie quietly beside Evan's chair during group sessions, his head resting on Evan's boot. Whenever someone's voice cracked or their hands began to tremble, Kaiser would rise, walk over, and place his head gently in their lap. There was something disarming about him, something that could cross the distances words couldn't. One of the counselors, Sarah McAdams, a tall, freckled woman in her late 30s with kind eyes and a voice soft as spring rain, once said, "I've seen therapy take months to do what that dog does in seconds." She had a background in trauma recovery, having lost her own brother to suicide after his third deployment. She carried that grief like a purpose, and she saw in Kaiser the same gift she had always prayed for her brother to find: companionship without judgment. Evan never saw himself as a teacher, but the veterans began to listen when he spoke. "Healing doesn't come from silence or pills," he told them one evening, his voice rough but steady. "Sometimes it comes from a heartbeat beside you." He glanced at Kaiser, who looked up with those knowing amber eyes, as if he understood every word. The room was quiet, except for the soft sound of the dog's breathing. Afterward, a young Marine named Danny Ruiz approached him. Danny was 24, his right arm in a brace, eyes shadowed by the kind of nightmares that didn't fade with dawn. "How did you do it?" he asked. "How'd you make the noise stop?" Evan looked at him for a long moment. "I didn't," he said, "but I stopped trying to fight it alone." He reached down to scratch Kaiser's neck. "He taught me that." Danny smiled for the first time in weeks, a small, fragile thing. "Guess I need my own Kaiser, huh?" Evan nodded. "You need something or someone to remind you that you still belong here." The next few months became a rhythm of quiet purpose. Evan helped the center start a canine therapy program for veterans, with Nora providing medical oversight and Rita volunteering her weekends to help with logistics. They partnered with local shelters, rescuing dogs that had been deemed unadoptable. Evan often joked, "Broken soldiers, broken dogs. Seems fair we fix each other." The idea caught on. Soon, a handful of veterans began working with their own dogs, learning patience through training, trust through care. Buffalo bloomed slowly that year. By April, the streets were lined with tulips planted by community volunteers. The same people who had once avoided Evan now greeted him by name. Frank Delaney, the gas station owner who'd once complained about Kaiser, stopped by one morning with coffee and a sheepish grin. "Didn't think I'd ever say it," he muttered, "but that's one fine dog you got there." Evan accepted the cup with a nod. "He's better than fine," he said quietly. "He's the reason I'm still here." That night, as the sun dipped behind the lake and the air turned crisp, Evan sat on the porch with Kaiser at his feet. The final traces of snow glittered under the streetlights like fragments of old pain refusing to vanish completely. Inside, a radio played softly, some old country tune about homecoming and second chances. Evan leaned back, closing his eyes. The weight of the past was still there, but lighter now, manageable. Kaiser stirred, then rested his head on Evan's knee. The man looked down at him, eyes soft. "You came from death," he whispered, voice trembling. "And you taught me how to live." The shepherd's ears perked, and he released a low, soulful howl, long and haunting, fading into the night like a prayer. There were no medals on the wall, no parades, no grand speeches. Just a man and his dog. Two survivors sitting beneath a sky finally clear. And for once, the silence didn't mean emptiness. It meant peace. Final message. The miracle beneath the ordinary. In the stillness after the storm, Evan finally understood. Miracles don't always arrive with thunder or halos. Sometimes they come in the quiet form of a loyal companion, a creature that asks for nothing, yet gives everything. God doesn't always heal through lightning and fire. Sometimes he heals through fur, through loyalty, through love that expects no reward. Kaiser was not just a dog. He was grace wrapped in flesh and heartbeat. A reminder that even when life buries us in snow, God plants something beneath it, waiting to rise again. If you've ever felt broken, forgotten, or lost in your own storm, remember, your miracle may already be walking beside you, in a friend, a loved one, or a quiet moment of faith that keeps you breathing. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Psalm 34:18. So tonight, let's give thanks for second chances, for love that redeems, and for the silent miracles that guide us home. Tell us in the comments, who or what has been your miracle in life? Share this story to remind someone that faith still moves through the smallest acts of kindness. And if this story touched your heart, subscribe for more tales of hope, healing, and the grace that God hides in everyday lives. May the Lord bless you, keep you safe, and remind you, even in your darkest night, that you are never truly alone.